Welcome to the Care Sector Expert Chat. We've had already some wonderful chats with lots of great people. Just introduce yourself quickly and tell us your role here at HCR.
Perfect, and thanks for having me. I'm Laura Shelton, and I'm a partner in the regulatory team at HCR Law in our specialist healthcare team.
Wonderful. Do you like your job?
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's very varied. No 2 days are the same, and I think that helps to keep it interesting.
Yeah, we were saying before, weren't we, that we work across a few different sectors, but primarily in health and social care. And some of the nicest people you meet, certainly for us, are in that sector, aren't they? It takes really special people to do the jobs they do. I'm sure that's your experience.
Definitely, I would definitely agree with that.
So just give us a run through day to day. What does your day look like? What sort of things are you dealing with? Who are you chatting to?
Oh, it's $1 million question because day to day, because of the nature of the work that I do, no 2 days look the same. When I try to describe it to people, including my husband, I'm saying I'm a real distress purchase for providers of health and social care. So, I mean, I work across the health and social care space, really in relation to regulation, but generally speaking, my clients are adult social care providers. So that's care homes, nursing homes, learning disability service, supported living, the list goes on. And my bread and butter work is helping them with regulatory challenges. And that can be a CQC or Ofsted inspection reports that they're not happy with, enforcement action that they want to respond to, serious incidents in a home, or inquests, and also the whole range of sort of enforcement action that comes alongside inspections and also CQC registration. That's become a trickier area, both in terms of timing and in terms of types of service over the years. But yeah, it's really varied, and it can vary from sort of, really detailed challenging of inspections to being at the Care Standards Tribunal in relation to cases, be that registration or enforcement. And I also do a lot of inquest work where there's been what's termed an unnatural death in a care setting. And so, yeah, I do a lot of that type of work. So it really depends. My week's planned out, and then the phone rings and someone's having a crisis, and it's, all hands to the pump to help the provider to get through whatever it is that they're going through at that time.
And what's the call or the email that you get excited about? What do you love working on? What's your niche?
So I love tribunal work. That's, if I got to choose what I did day in, day out in the sector, that's what I would do. And we do see quite a lot of it. My background a long time ago when I qualified in Scotland was in court work and doing my own advocacy. I don't do so much of that these days, but I really enjoy the court processes and procedures. And so, yeah, the tribunal work and also the inquest type work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my favourite. But I also, I get satisfaction out of getting good results in terms of, upgrades to inspection ratings or making sure that enforcement action that isn't that.
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, it's difficult, and I'm upfront with providers, and I think in the space, providers know it can be difficult to try and challenge a regulatory decision because they're, a snapshot in time. But sometimes the regulator does really get it wrong, and it is really satisfying when you're able to turn it around for the provider because it has such a big impact.
Yeah, it's massive.
It's not just on the colour over the door when families are trying to decide what service to choose. It's, if that service wants to expand, it needs funding. If they want local authority commissioning, there's certain local authorities that won't commission if your rated requires improvement. The list goes on. So it's not just about, the colours and the stars on the inspection report. There's so much going on in the background. So getting those results is good as well.
But that's harder to do.
It definitely is. Yeah.
What's that timescale? So what's the shift there? Do we know?
It really varies. I mean, in terms of if you're thinking about challenging an inspection report, obviously we've got the new single assessment framework, and there's a process which is the factual accuracy comments process. Now that process itself hasn't changed in the new framework, although the reports themselves have changed. And I know, well, I mean, you guys do lots of work in the space, you'll be used to reading the reports. They become a lot more vague.
Yeah.
A lot more standard language, a lot less detail, a lot less transparency, ironically, around the scoring, which is what this new system was supposed to change. But in terms of the timeframes, provider gets an inspection report, which is in draft. It's not shared with anyone but the provider. And they get 10 working days to then prepare any factual accuracy comments. Now, that's, especially if you look at CQC's guidance, and some of the case law that's been through the courts on this is not limited to challenging pure factual inaccuracies. You can also challenge, and you should also challenge the ratings if you've got grounds at that stage, because processes further down the line, like rating reviews, for example, are much more difficult. And then beyond that, you've got judicial review, which is tricky. But so you get 10 working days to respond, and then you would hope that you would hear back from the Care Quality Commission within the same amount of time. But, you know, I've got a huge variation in terms of casework of what's come back quickly and what hasn't, and it's really difficult to predict. And clients really want to know, when are we going to hear back? And, you know, it's really difficult. I do check this fairly frequently. I don't think there's any current key performance indicators for the CQC to respond. They used to have KPIs from the date the inspection took place to the date the report was supposed to be published, and that gave you a bit of an indicator of the timeframes. But since the move to the single assessment framework, it's all a bit up in the air. I mean, even to get the draft report, I had a flurry of work, probably. In fact, I remember it was just before Easter, because I actually had some deadlines that fell on Easter Sunday as the way things went. So I remember being particularly busy around this time.
Eating Easter eggs off.
Yeah. And, but challenging inspection reports and dealing with enforcement action. And both of those inspections had happened pre-Christmas. And this was the providers, just getting the reports at this point.
Yeah, well, that's not unheard of, though, is it?
No, it's not. It's really not. And I know, I mean, you know,
which doesn't make it okay.
It doesn't. And I know, I mean, it's very easy for me to be critical, because people only really come to me when they're having difficulties with the regulator. It's no secret that, you know, CQC's had its difficulties. They are being open and transparent, engaging with stakeholders and trying to improve. And, you know, I really hope that yields positive results. But in the whole time I've worked in the sector, regulation, the timing of inspections, how long providers are rated as requires improvement, etc., has been a real problem. So I hope that that's something that, as we see the CQC start to engage on the CQC way and try to improve, as it will have to now, being so firmly in the public domain, that the timeframes from inspection to report coming out, from report being challenged to a response being received, because ultimately, you know, they've got a statutory duty to put accurate information in the public domain. And, you know, I would challenge the value really of, especially a negative report from an inspection that took place in November, finally being published, you know, February, March, April next year, when I'm 100% confident that my clients will have remedied whatever issues, any aware issues at that point. And so, you know, it's just thinking about the purpose of good regulation and what we can expect from it.
Yeah, because at that point they issue a press release, but actually it's 4 or 5 months down the line, and the care company, like you say, is quite often gone through and sourced out any issues that were there.
It's quite often a whole different service.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they're waiting for their next inspection, aren't they? So I was going to go into your love of the care sector, which we'll go to, but I'm loving that we've jumped straight into this. My next question around it is, when you realise that you've had a less than good CQC inspection, that happens pretty quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That decision, do I challenge it? Do I not challenge it? That's a tough one for a care provider, because it's not cheap, I wouldn't imagine. So where are the parameters there? You know, should people be automatically just challenging generally, or?
I don't think well, not to talk myself out of a job here, but it's important that the challenge is credible, and I will always say that to clients that come to me. And it's very easy immediately when you get a report that you're not happy with to phone me and be, it's unfair, it's this, it's that.
Yeah, and it's also the emotions going right.
There's people have a lot invested in it. They work really hard, and it means a lot to their business. And there can be so many small things that just don't go quite right on the day that can lead to things, you know, not being as favourable as you would expect.
Yeah.
But yeah, I quite often get those phone calls of, oh, it's unfair, I want to do this, I want to do that. And then I say, well, let's set up a call, let's have a chat about it. Let's go through the detail. What can you actually challenge?
Yeah.
And what's credible, and what have we got evidence to support?
Yeah.
What, in terms of CQC's guidance, will actually make a difference to your rating? So, for example, the guidance explains that as part of your factual accuracy challenge, you can also include information about improvements that you've made, which you can and you should, because that's what's going to go in the public domain if it goes in the report. But the guidance is also clear that that part of it probably won't affect your rating.
Yeah.
So it's about having that knowledge and knowing what's going to help you.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's going to be quite a personal business decision for the provider about whether they want to challenge. And a question I do get asked a lot is, am I just going to make life more difficult for myself if I do this? And you would like to think that it doesn't work like that, but there's individual personalities in all organisations, and a lot of it is relationship management. I think you have to look at what the draft rating you have is. If it's inadequate and there's clear mistakes, that obviously you're going to challenge that, because that's going to have really difficult potential consequences for you. Requires improvement's a really tricky rating, because it can mean you're just above inadequate or just below good. I mean, to an individual who's not got any knowledge of the sector, you're probably not going to look to place your mum or your nan in an RI home. But equally, it doesn't have the same sort of inadequate breach of the regulations that an inadequate rating does. The reason I often say to providers, I think it's worth challenging if you have the evidence to do so, is that you don't know when you're going to be re-inspected, and you could be stuck with this rating for a very long time. And that's
huge.
It was one of the biggest questions I still get asked these days when I go out and about. We do lots of work with care associations. I speak at lots of events, write articles, and I'm always asked to comment on, what can we do to be re-inspected? When are we going to be re-inspected? There's still services out there, I don't have the stats to hand, but that have been rated requires improvement for literally years, and they've not had CQC cross the threshold, and that's causing a whole load of difficulties for them.
Why aren't they going back? Should they? Is this what you were talking about before?
Yeah, they should. I mean, I think it's difficult. It's been a problem for a long time, and then of course we had COVID and inspections were paused, and then they were inspecting based on risk, which is obviously then highlighting the services that are risky from a public protection perspective, but those that are sort of, in that middle ground of requires improvement just haven't been touched. And I think it's a resource, it is a resource issue. It's also, there's obviously lots going on at the Care Quality Commission in terms of the changes to the inspection regime. They have made commitments to get out and re-inspect these services, but I don't know, I'm still not always seeing it on the ground, but it will take time.
Is there any legal implications there for CQC? Because if you're stuck with that kind of a rating, rightly or wrongly, maybe you got it initially and it was absolutely right, but you've made all the changes that they recommended, yet you're still sitting on that years later, you're working really hard to keep it. Just that rating's having a big impact on your business. It's having a big impact probably on your bottom line. So, is there any culpability from?
It's a difficult one to try and quantify and to try and challenge in that respect. But it is
infuriating though.
It is, and it's one of the most frustrating. As I say, it's the question I get asked most commonly. Before the single assessment framework, when we were inspecting more based on risk, there was also talk around then and guidance around then about also improvements triggering re-inspections. And what we used to do, and we still do when it's relevant with providers, I've done it actually relatively recently, where an RI service was having a really difficult impact, is that we, alongside the provider, instructed independent consultants to carry out their own sort of mock CQC inspection. We also gathered evidence there was some support from the local authority, and wrote to CQC to put that across and explain, in terms of your statutory duty to put information in the public domain, we think you need to be looking at this. It works in some cases, it doesn't in others. There's no magic formula. If there was, I probably wouldn't be here. I'd be retired.
You're a bit somewhere. I know, well, that'd be nice too. But from our perspective, certainly a lot of our PR clients that come through when we're looking at crisis stuff for them, any kind of positive press release you look to put out, you have to be careful about, because the paper they may pick up the positive news story, the wonderful thing you're doing, but they'll always refer back to the fact that you're rated inadequate. That comes up time and time again. So until you can get rid of that, it's a real problem, isn't it?
And that goes back to the timing of inspection reports as well, because a provider can get a negative report, say in December, or even a draft, and start to do the work, start to make the improvements, start to do the engagement with family commissioners, etc. Then as soon as the report gets published, the out-of-date report with the out-of-date rating, it triggers, I don't know if you're signed up for alerts for your clients, but I get alerts dropping into my inbox all the time. The press pick up on this type of thing. It's the same, so for 2 of those reports that I was talking about, the provider also received warning notices, again, months after the event, But warning notices, they're sort of the lowest level or one of the lowest levels of CQC enforcement, which providers often won't challenge, but they are almost automatically published. And by that, I mean a press release is issued or they're mentioned in the inspection report, something's put on the website. And again, that triggers local press to pick things up, and it can really undo months and months of hard work that providers have been trying to do to change the narrative. And it's a difficult situation for the regulator, because obviously they have got a statutory duty to report. But they have to really be thinking about, in the public interest, what should be in the public domain, what's actually useful for people who are going to be using services and providers.
Yeah, and I think on the opposite end of the scale, you're quite right. They've got a huge responsibility, haven't they, to keep people safe. So I think what you were talking about before was, the fact that there is, without a doubt, need for some reform there. So you feel like it could and should be being done better?
I think so. I mean, it's not just my personal opinion. I mean, obviously, having worked in the space for such a long time, I can see the difficulties that the current regulatory system places for providers.
The way they're having to work sometimes.
I think so. I mean, I think I think it is difficult. I think it's very process driven, which in a big organisation, it kind of has to be, but it doesn't then make it particularly user friendly. Like, for example, years ago, you used to try and call and speak to an inspector. You'd go through to the National Customer Service Centre and you'd be on hold for ages, passed around the houses, and it's just really, really, really inefficient. Whereas if you think about, if someone like safeguarding, for example, was trying to call a care home and it was going to a central switchboard, you were being passed around the houses, oh no, can't speak to the inspector, I'll give you this number, that number. It's just, the irony of it isn't lost on me. And I think, there's been many people more qualified than me that, Mike Richards has done his report, Penny Dash's report. We're about to have the Casey Commission. My worry with it all is I think there's a wealth of evidence and information about what's not working. What we don't really have is a strategic plan to make changes at any pace. And I think that's the difficulty. And that's probably in my day-to-day issues. It's the same with the funding issue. I mean, it's no secret that funding's been completely lacking, particularly from publicly funded care has been difficult. But yeah, my day-to-day sort of dealing with that interim change is almost, it's frustrating for providers, because there was a period of time where it was all over the news, and it was quite nice for me because what we do is quite niche. As I say, I don't even think my husband really fully understands what I do, but at points where, the Care Quality Commission was in the news, I'm like, this is my sector, this is what I do. And, but providers are saying, everyone's talking about how bad it is, but we don't really have a plan. There's talk and there's commitment and there's promises, but I'm not yet seeing that change trickle through. But I am optimistic about it, and I hope for everyone's sake, because there will always be a need. People say to me, are you worried you won't have a job? But I think, people will always need to be represented in respect of the enforcement action and that type of thing. And it's not always crises that we deal with. And when you talked about sort of changes in the space and thinking about the background CQC works against, and thinking about things that have happened, like in the past, Winterbourne View, all of that, and the need for proper scrutiny, particularly of services for people with learning disabilities and autism. CQC, that was it is still a priority for them, but they were doing a lot of work around that, and they're what was at the time called Registering the Right Support. It's now Right Support, Right Care, Right Culture guidance, which was setting parameters around registration of new services for people with learning disabilities and autism. I did a lot of work in that space where essentially providers were finding it difficult to have new services that were larger than 6 beds registered, or to add 1 or 2 more beds to a 6-bed service. Now, I can fully see the rationale behind the guidance for small services and support that, but it's not a one-size-fits-all model, and there are reasons why in some cases that would need to be departed from. But to challenge a registration decision that's been unsuccessful, that ends up at the Care Standards Tribunal. And I've done some work on that successfully and unsuccessfully, and then gone on to challenge it at the upper tribunal, which I don't know that many lawyers in the space have done. But it's just an interesting way to see how the landscape and the background of CQC trying to fulfil its purpose for protection versus balancing what providers are trying to do. Because also in some specialist services, a model of 6 beds just doesn't add up. It's not financially viable.
Yeah.
And where does that leave, provision? It's people being placed out of area, it's families being split up, it's people being kept in accommodation that's not suitable. Exactly. And so that part of the job is really satisfying for me. And that's where I have found myself becoming really personally invested with individuals, even though I act for the provider.
It's hard not to be, isn't it?
It's hard not to when you know that there's some accommodation that someone could move into and it's just not being registered. And then it feels really bureaucratic. And what I've enjoyed is being able to find solutions in that space.
And bringing it back to the human beings.
Exactly. And yes, that's ultimately why, I guess, I know you were going to ask me how I ended up in the care area as a fair sector. Especially I get lots of trainees and young lawyers. They come through into our team especially, and they look at some of the work we do and they're just like, how did you end up here? And it was pretty much by accident. I've always had a strong interest in public law. Never wanted to be a sort of corporate lawyer, so I always did sort of more public law, human rights, that type of thing. And I worked for some professional regulators, so General Teaching Council in Scotland, General Dental Council, and I still do some of that type of work for professional discipline. Really enjoyed that. A role was advertised and I thought it would have more of that work, but it turned out to be quite a lot of adult social care, Care Quality Commission, Ofsted type challenges, which I fell into 10 years ago. And I've stayed because you can really see, for me, you can see the outcome it has for individuals. And, old age and social care is probably going to come to most of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
There were periods
not going away, is it?
Yeah, and it's something that I think people can relate to one way or another. Like during COVID, for example, like lots of my sort of friends and corporate colleagues were not particularly busy because lots of things slowed down. Whereas in adult social care, I was probably the busiest I've ever been. And
we got very easy.
But keeping on top of the guidance about, admissions into services where there were positive, there were negative tests, visiting.
Oh, crikey, that was a whole
it was, and it changed literally every day. I mean, I can't.
Did you find that, because it was awful across the board a lot of the time, wasn't it? But those challenges, because it was slightly different from what you're dealing with day to day, did you find it rewarding? Did you, I suppose it stretched everything that you...
Yeah.
Because you've never had to do anything like that before, have we?
It was definitely rewarding. And part of the reason I began discussing it is because it was relatable. At that time, my now late grandmother was in a care home in Scotland. And so I could relate the day-to-day decisions that were having to be made and the impact on, the circumstances in my family life and the worries that I would have and if I was a provider. But professionally, it was really an interesting time. And it's probably... Not if COVID had happened, would I still be in the sector? Would I be, would I have felt I'd exhausted it and moved on? I don't know, but it was really dynamic and it was stretching, no one had had to deal with it before, but we were all trying to interpret the guidance that was coming out daily, give advice to providers, and do the best we could in a really difficult situation for everyone.
Has it gone, would you say you're working now in a similar way to the way you were working before COVID, or has the landscape changed massively, or have you noticed certain big differences, or where are we?
I think in terms of the way that I work and the way I engage with clients and providers has definitely changed. Pre-COVID, I did a lot of my work face-to-face in care homes and care settings. I do. I mean, it's difficult. The travel is difficult because our clients are all over the country. So, there's obviously that element, but sometimes
the video call.
Yeah, I know, like Zoom fatigue, Teams fatigue. Certainly, I didn't even know what Teams was pre-COVID. Genuinely never used it. I'd only just got to grips with Zoom, whereas now I actually can't think of the last time I was in a care setting. So I think that's a shame. That said, in terms of cost to providers and efficiencies and providing a streamlined service, I suppose that's a bit more of a benefit than me physically going out and going through records with a manager. But it really helps you to put colour on submissions. If you've been out to the home, you've seen the improvements. Sometimes I'll have been out and I'll think, goodness, they've got some work to do. But it helps you to formulate a plan, and now I'm much more reliant on what I'm being told. So that's definitely changed.
Because we're in and out of care homes all the time. And you're quite right. It's those sorts of, when you're actually in there and meeting people and seeing people, the residents as well, where you really easily pick up on bits and pieces, don't you? And the feel of it. And
I think, talking about becoming emotionally invested, some of the registration cases I worked on, I went to, these are small services, I went there and with all the appropriate, risk assessments and, appropriate guidance in place, but I did meet with some of the service users, some of the families, I could really see, and I could, hand on heart, say this provider is trying to do the right thing. Whereas I think, I dread to think what people or what the lawyers at the CQC think of the sort of defence bodies trying to, stick up for the providers. But, ultimately we've all got the same goal. We all want to have safe care in a system that works for everybody, both the providers and both the service users. And I think post-COVID, with CQC crossing the threshold less, I think that's been another change. They've always really emphasised the voice of people using services. So, for example, they'll interview a couple of people during an inspection report. Whether that's positive or negative, you'll be sure to read about that in every single domain.
Yeah.
But because they were going out to services more, there was a bit more sort of triangulation, a bit more, we saw this, we looked at that, we did this. Whereas now, they're spending hardly any time in services. In some, in cases that I have had come across my desk. And I can think of one really pertinent example recently where it's a big service, a specialist service for people with really complex needs. And I think they spent a day, maybe a day and a half in the service. The inspection then went on for another 8 weeks. And they were continually bombarded with requests for documentation, day in, day out. It was almost a full-time job for the provider to be able to keep on top of that. But then they've got an electronic care planning system, not one that necessarily the inspectors are familiar with. And so that caused a whole host of difficulties. They actually had tried to take urgent enforcement action, which we managed to have put off. And I just recently found out that a warning notice that came out as a result of that we challenged has also been successful. And part of that, I'm sure, is that we were able to set out that, the process that you've gone through here, if you'd have just come to the service, if you had just sat down, or you'd come back to the service and sat down with the manager, asked them to show you where this is on the electronic care planning system, it would have, the answer would have been there. We could have avoided all of this.
Why didn't they?
I don't know. And I think it is post-COVID, there is a real drive. And I think perhaps a little bit of it is to do with the single assessment framework as well, being able to do it all remotely on the portal. I think there are pros and cons of remote work, both in my day-to-day job and in the regulator's job. But I think it has to be balanced and it has to be nuanced, and you can't be process-driven with it. And I think that's sometimes where we find it a bit difficult with the regulator, because they will say, well, our process says this, it says that. Whereas a long time ago, you used to know who the inspection manager was.
Yeah, and
you'd be able to pick up the phone and just sort of have a bit more of a nuanced conversation about it. But you don't get that now. And really, providers are almost forced into the factual accuracy stage and the expense if you decide to instruct a solicitor with that.
So I'm old enough to remember visions of when CQC inspections were going on, people sitting in big boardrooms just surrounded by, before it was all put on a computer, surrounded by big boxes and taking days just going through data and seeing firsthand what was going on. So it is much harder, isn't it,
if it's all being done off-site and you're relying. I mean, I guess it's one of the pros and cons of technology as well. Lots of providers are moving on to electronic care planning systems, but they're all different. I mean, sometimes I get records sent and I'm I need you to talk me through this because I've not seen this particular one before. And so I imagine that is difficult for inspectors to get to grips with. But I think what we need is a sort of system whereby, they are asking questions.
It's difficult, but it doesn't mean the work hasn't been done, or it doesn't mean it's not there.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Interesting. Okay. Going forward, what do you think are the biggest issues looming for people in the care sector?
Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about regulation and reform of CQC, so that's one thing that comes to me, and I won't, I'm not going to dwell on that too much more. I think it needs to be done though, and it needs to be done at pace. And I think, a Commission on Social Care generally that's going to report in 2028 is probably not quick enough.
Yeah.
But what we also see at the moment is, real difficulties around funding.
Okay.
And that is going to be, that is a continuing challenge for providers. And, there's been a lot, and I think what's great about the sector, although sad that it's sort of come to this, that they've had to do this, you'll probably be aware of the Providers Unite movement. They've been marching on Parliament to try and get better recognition for the work that social care does.
Yeah.
And part of that is funding.
Yeah.
And there are lots of local authorities who, of course, are constrained in their budget. But the amount that they're offering to pay providers of care, the amount they're offering to uplift fees, simply doesn't reflect the fair cost of care. And for particularly small and medium-sized providers who don't have a balance of private payers to sort of balance that out, that's going to become difficult.
When do you get involved with things like that?
And that's interesting. We're seeing lots more of that type of work at the moment, actually. I have historically always done bits and pieces of contractual disputes with local authorities regarding uplifts, and sometimes on a case-by-case basis in relation to individual needs. But at the moment, where there's things like the increases in employers' national insurance contribution, that's having a huge and disproportionate effect on small and medium care providers particularly.
Yeah.
So in some cases, providers are coming to us to look at their contracts, and we're, in the appropriate circumstances, making arguments that, in fact, there's a contractual argument that this is an external cost that should be borne by both parties, and trying to go down a contractual challenge to get some more money out of local authorities to cover the cost of care. And we are actually having quite a lot of success.
Yeah.
And there's different ways to do it. And other firms have gone down the route of judicial review, and there's been published decisions very recently. The difficulty with judicial review is that that's just a review of the legality or rationality of the council's decision to award a certain amount. All it requires the council to then do is go back and re-look at that. It doesn't actually always give a tangible remedy. Whereas if providers can look at their contracts, there's sometimes, not always, it's on a case-by-case basis. Typical lawyer answer, I need to look at the contract. but genuinely, and this is not a sales pitch, people just don't necessarily know about it and don't think about it in the first instance. It's something that's always struck me in adult social care commissioning and the management of local authority funding, and the way it varies between local authority to local authority. There's so many different systems and processes. Sometimes providers are really struggling to find the contracts that they've signed, if they've signed up to them. I don't know that there's any other sector that operates like that.
And it's really tricky, isn't it? Again, because these most of these companies are very much set up to look after other human beings, some of the most vulnerable human beings that we have. So having to then direct such a massive amount of time to worrying about funding and what they're entitled to, and whether they should even be going after it, or do they just, bow their heads and get on with it.
And the other challenges that are looming are, workforce challenges, and that's multifaceted. Part of it,
especially given the recent news.
Well, the immigration, if the immigration white paper is to come into fruition, that's going to have a really difficult impact on the care sector, again, disproportionately. But there's also the fact that I think there needs to be a real shift around how people perceive working in care and the value that it has placed on it, and professionalising that and the respect that ought to be, afforded to that and paid appropriately. I mean, it is in some places, it's some of the lowest paid work for some of the most difficult, demanding jobs. I mean, even, there's the actual care work itself, but being a registered manager comes with it a whole host of responsibilities and potentially criminal liability if you get it wrong. It should be more respected than it is, and I think that's a challenge that's going to have to be faced as well. So regulation, funding, workforce, I think. But the sad thing about it is that those haven't probably changed since I started work in this sector. Those sort of themes have always,
the last 10 years you haven't seen
there's a lot of talk. There's white papers and there's reforms, and I think,
why is it just talk? Why isn't there more action being taken? Where's the sticking point?
I wish, again, if I had the answer to that, I probably wouldn't be here. It's difficult, and I think, and again, it's fortunate and unfortunate that providers have had to sort of take that into their own hands to try and be heard.
Absolutely.
And there is a school of thought that everything is looked at in terms of the NHS and social care, sort of the Cinderella service. And I think that in many cases that is,
if they could fix the social care
issues,
the NHS issues would
talk for hours about this. I mean, it would, and it's seeing it through and thinking about the value that would add. But successive governments have talked a lot about it, and the change hasn't yet happened. I said I didn't want to do too many of the political questions, but I think that's fair to say. And and that's if I was to draw a conclusion under our discussion, that's where it would need to be moving forward. Those three themes.
Well, hopefully over the course of the next 10 years, maybe we might see some changes in an ideal world for you then. what does the care sector look like in 10 years' time?
Well, it's one that's properly funded.
Probably would take you out of business.
Yeah, get a little bit. I think proper funding, proper respect for the workforce,
Yeah.
and proper regulation that works for both the people who are using the services and the people who are providing the services.
Yeah.
And there will always be a place for legal advice in and around that. And there's always a place, especially for people who have specialist knowledge that have done it day in, day out, that know how to get to the heart of the issues. But those changes would benefit all of us.
Yeah. Okay, finally, if there was one piece of advice that you would give to a care provider or care owner, as a lawyer working in this space, what would it be?
Don't panic. I guess I'm thinking about that in my day-to-day job when we get the initial calls. There's almost always something that can be done if you're in a situation where you've got, regulatory difficulties, etc.
Yeah. And it's pretty standard, isn't it? You've seen it all before.
Yeah,
we see the same
that's
in crisis communications. Chances are, yes, it's awful for you. You're going through it, but the processes are the same, and the outcomes are usually the same as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. That I think that would be the first thing that I can think of. And I think that's probably good advice.
Yeah. And May, anything else you'd like to say that you think would be useful to people listening? I'm sure there's a million things. We could probably sit here and talk for 3 hours.
Yeah. People are probably fed up listening to me about it now, but it is, it is. I was preparing for this thinking, I'm not going to have anything to say. What am I going to say? I think you always have a crisis of confidence about imposter syndrome, but it's always the same once I get talking about it.
It's a passionate subject, isn't it?
And it is a passionate sector, and it's, it's not without its challenges, but that keeps it interesting. But, it is something that I know lots and lots about, and anyone wants to reach out, to speak about all the individual issues, I'm more than happy to do that.
Yeah. And ultimately, always taking it back to the human being, which is why we all do it. And I never did get around to my question. I suppose we touched on it a little bit, didn't we, about why you do it? But I think I've read between the lines, it is about the human being at the heart of it.
Definitely.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It's been fascinating. We've loved talking to you, and
thank you.